My name is Grant Cameron. It's December the 20th, 2017. It's 5 days following disclosure. There's been a couple of presidents who have talked about UFOs in the last couple of weeks. And so, or there's been a part of a discussion about presidents and UFOs. So I wanted to do a presentation on Barack Obama's involvement in the UFO phenomena. Maybe people may not know Barack Obama talked a lot about UFOs, and he may have something to do with the disclosure initiative that I believe is happening at the moment. Yesterday, December 19th, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary for the President Trump, took a question in the at the White House, and she was asked whether Donald Trump believes in UFOs. And that comes from this release last Saturday that talked about a $22 million program inside the Department of Defense to investigate UFOs. Sarah stated that she had not talked to the president about it, but that she would talk to him and she would circle back around, or she would bring the question. So that's what sort of initiated this presentation today. And we'll see what Huckabee says today in the news conference. But an interesting point on this is that Sarah's father is Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, and he actually took a UFO question in 2007 at exactly the same time that Barack Obama took a question, which I'll be discussing in a minute. But he was asked about his view on UFOs. What did he think? And this is what Sarah Huckabee Sanders' father said about UFOs. He said, "I believe in God, not UFO." The asking of questions in the White House press room is a very rare occasion. It happened in January of 1954. It happened in 1997 when a question was asked about Bill Clinton requesting an answer to UFOs and the assassination of JFK. And then there was no question in the White House to the press secretary until May of last year. And what happened in May last year was that the New York Times, that started the latest sort of talk about UFOs last Saturday, had written a straight up piece. It was May the 10th of 2016, wrote a piece about Hillary Clinton making three statements in answer to questions from various people, stating the fact that she was going to look into the UFO phenomena and was indicating that she would make some sort of disclosure initiative if she became the president. That led the New York Times to do a straight up piece on May the 10th in which they referenced what Hillary Clinton had said, and it initiated three reporters. We have Andrea Mitchell up at the top left, we have Mark Knoller on the top right, and then we have April Ryan bottom left, who within a week had all asked questions about Hillary Clinton's UFO initiative, this effort that she said she was going to disclose, she was going to do something. And they asked President Obama's press secretary whether Barack Obama was going to beat Hillary to the punch, would the president disclose? And what the press secretary said is, "I do not have a tab in my briefing book for that. I don't know. I wasn't briefed." But the president jokingly states that his job gives him access to that type of material. And the press secretary said to these reporters, "You should ask him. It'll be interesting." April Ryan's question came a little bit later, but she was more adamant. She said, "What's the story on Roswell? Is it classified? Why is this a part of a cover-up? Is this classified material?" And the press secretary started to take a drink of water. And it was at that point that she said, "Look, you're doing the dance. You're trying to avoid this. You're not going to get away with this." And the press secretary said, "You just keep trying." And so those questions came in April of last year. The latest question that was asked yesterday was asked by Jordan Fabian, who's in the bottom right, and he works for a news agency called The Hill, and he's the one that asked the question yesterday. So we have an increase from 2 questions in 60 years to a series of questions in a couple of months, and I would imagine the pressure will continue. And the most important part of this whole thing is that the president is the person you need to ask the question to. Anybody else may not have a need to know. The president definitely would have a need to know. This is why the president has a need to know, and I've pointed this out in a number of lectures. He has no security clearance. People will always talk about, it's above the president's head. It's total nonsense. The president is the guy who's in charge of all classification. It is all security material is done through executive orders, not done through law, which means if it's done by executive order, it's an executive order from the President of the United States. And so all classification, all security is coming through the executive office of the president. So the president has no security clearance, the same as senators have no security clearance. But the senators will need some sort of need to know, and they're always demanding answers to various questions. And this comes to Senator Reid, who was the guy who initiated this $22 million program for the Department of Defense, along with 3 other senators. The indication was that he did get a briefing, that he was demanding answers, and he got a briefing. And how much he was told, I'm not sure. But the president and all people in Congress and the Senate do not have security clearances. The second reason the president is important, the important guy to ask, is he is the head of state. And if you're going to be dealing with a foreign power such as aliens, extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, whatever this phenomena is, the only person that can negotiate, the only person that can do treaties is the President of the United States, the head of state. The president is the civilian commander of the military, which means if the cover-up is being run by the military, they salute and report to the civilian commander, who's the president. And as the statement goes, when the president asks for something, they will move mountains to make sure the president gets it. So there is nobody in the military, as far as I'm concerned, who is going to not obey the law or uphold the Constitution and suddenly go rogue on the commander-in-chief. So he's the head of the military. He's also the CEO of the government. So if the government is behind the cover-up, he's the chief executive officer of the government. He's at the top of that pyramid as well. And he's the head of all 17 intelligence agencies that we know of. There may be more. As I pointed out in my book, Managing Magic, I believe there has been gradual acclimatization, gradual disclosure of the UFO phenomena for the last 70 years. So what happened last Saturday, as far as I'm concerned, was a planned event. And I can, in lectures coming up, I will define exactly how this thing occurred. But it was a planned event. I knew it was coming a year ago. I was told quite categorically by people that government people would identify themselves. This would not be Mr. X type people. Government people would identify themselves, and they would confirm the fact that the UFO phenomena is for real and it's being investigated. That's exactly what happened last Saturday. So this is not new. This what happened last Saturday. This has been going on, I contend, for the last 70 years. The program that's getting all the attention right now is the people surrounding Tom DeLonge. And I'd like to point out the fact that Tom DeLonge really is no longer a part of this story. That's what I was told, is that government people would identify themselves. So it was the platform, they were going through DeLonge's platform that he had set up. But basically what you're seeing now, for example, last Saturday, you're seeing government people, not Tom DeLonge, that are basically talking. Tom DeLonge is not really part of this story anymore, and it's the government people that are talking. So, but the Tom DeLonge operation is big. He does have the sources that he says he has. These high-level people set him up and basically fed him a bunch of people who are using Tom DeLonge to get material out. So Tom DeLonge did not set this thing up. He set up the platform, but he did not set up these people. He was moved from person to person, and all these people sort of identified themselves and joined his team. There's a second initiative, and this is going on. This is a documentary that is coming out of Hollywood, and I will talk about this maybe at another time, but this documentary is going on at the same time. This is also a CIA operation, and it is going to get into the story of the portal, which is of extreme importance to me, but I won't talk too much about that today. There's a third one, and this is Project Condign. There are a number of documents that are leaking out of this very highly classified program that was run out of the United Kingdom, and a 460-page report. And what I'm told is there's 15 more documents coming, and it's the same sort of thing. It's the documents are coming next week, next month, and it's this gradual leaking of these documents into the UFO community. So there's a number of these programs that are going on at the present time. I've been told as many as 6 teams are in operation right now, disclosing stuff into the public. Tom DeLonge, this is the one that's got all the controversy going. Tom DeLonge talks about videos. He talked about this in this internet post on November the 27th, but he already had the film in the middle of October, and he was actually talking about the film at the end of November, and a lot of people were saying, oh, it's not going to happen, it's garbage, and they have delivered on this, but it is the Department of Defense, not Tom, that actually made the announcement. What I always want to point out in this whole thing, people think, well, you know, Tom dragged this stuff out of the government, or that Lou Elizondo came forward and brought this material. The thing in all these operations that you have to keep in mind very clearly is that this is the most highly classified subject in the United States, and that's according to a top secret memo. This is from Canada. This is the Canadians were talking through discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy in Washington, who were able to obtain the following information. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rated higher even than the H-bomb. And this was written in November of 1950. So it's the most highly classified subject. So when you have people coming forward with film, talking about hardware, or talking about bringing out plans out of Lockheed Skunk Works, this is a leak. This does not happen. You do not walk out of the Department of Defense with a pile of film and start releasing it. This is most highly classified, so that's why I say all these operations, as far as I'm concerned, are controlled operations from the government to get material out. As I said, and I've pointed this out many times, I won't spend much time on this, the government is not disclosing. If they wanted to do a full disclosure, if they wanted to actually do it, they would put the president, they would put the CIA director out on the cameras, and they would provide the pictures of the crafts and the bodies, and it would all be over. So they're not disclosing. They're not covering up, because if they wanted to cover up, they would just shut up and quit talking about it. The United States of America is the only place that this happens, where you have these leaks and films and deep throats and stuff like that. And so they're not covering up. The same as the aliens are not covering up, because if the aliens wanted to cover up, they would just stop turning the lights on the crafts and stop appearing. So they're doing something in between, and what it is, it's a gradual disclosure, small d disclosure, acclimatization, what I call something in between. They're doing the plausible deniability thing. So the film gets released, but there's always this plausible deniability, even with Saturday's situation, where people are coming forward now and saying, you know, this was a setup, this wasn't true, and there's always this plausible deniability in these programs. So what I want to look at is and because this has only been going on the last couple of years, very intense for the last couple of years. So what I look at is, did Barack Obama green light what is going on right now? Did he set this in motion, this whole very intense declassification or release of films and evidence that this subject is actually for real? I believe it is true, and I'm going to outline what happened. Before the president becomes a president, he is the same as you and I. He has no need to know. He really doesn't really know what's going on. Barack Obama took 2 questions as when he was running for president. One was in this Democratic debate in 2007, and all these clips you can see on the internet. I'm just going to verbally state what they state, but all these clips are available on the internet. So Barack Obama takes a question about the Apollo 11 astronauts who said that there was life they believed there was life in outer space, and Senator Obama, what do you think? And so he answers this question, and he said, I don't know, and I don't presume to know. What I know is there's life here on Earth, and we are not attending to life here on Earth. There may be some other folks on the way. So he doesn't really know. He's a guy who's just speculating based upon his life experience. This second one, I think this is a reporter from Chicago, and basically asks him, as a Senator Obama, if you become the president and you find out there's extraterrestrials, will you let the people know? And Obama says it would depend on whether the aliens were Democrats or Republicans. So he makes a joke, and this is how Obama tends to handle the situation. Obama never lies. You know, all the stuff I've seen, he never lies, but he uses jokes to try to deflect the very difficult questions that he is, because he is under secrecy like everybody else, that he has to keep the secret. When the president becomes the president, everything changes. Now the president is the guy who's in control of the CIA. He's in control of the cover-up. He's the Wizard of Oz. He's the guy who's running the whole show. And so everything changes at that moment. This is Michael Hayden, who did the briefing of Barack Obama, and he talks about how the intelligence briefing works, and he talks about covert operations and what he calls the attention-getting stage of the briefing. And he goes in, the briefing, I believe, was done in Chicago, and Barack Obama actually talked about the briefing. Barack said, it's a good thing that it happened in a building with bars on the window, because if the bars hadn't been there, I might have jumped out. So what Hayden says is to get the president-elect's attention, he said the whole operation, he said, they come from the office of the president. So he goes to the president and he says, before you get elected, I want to let you know we're doing this, 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 we're doing this. And when you put your hand on the Bible at 12 noon on the day of inauguration, unless you tell us to stop, we're still going to be doing this and this and this and this and this. And that's what he calls the attention-getting stage, where suddenly you're going to be responsible. So he said, these operations come from the office of the president and not the person of the president. So unless you say something different, we will keep chugging along. So it's the idea is these are operations that have run for many presidents, and the president can change it. But if the president doesn't change it, these operations continue. And I believe the UFO thing, as I pointed out in my book, has been going on for 70 years. So unless the president says, stop the UFO disclosure, this acclimatization thing, unless the president stops it, it just continues on. So it's not a decision that any one president makes. It's a decision that it was made many, many years ago, and it continues from president to president. This is an important element of this story, and that is, this is a news article that appeared when Donald Trump announced that he was no longer going to finance Syrian rebels. When that happened, a bunch of articles appeared, and the question was asked, did Trump declassify a secret CIA program with a tweet? Now, the whole idea comes down to this. In this article, it says, while Executive Order 12356, which deals with national security and classification of information, says the president has the authority to classify information. That's what I pointed out before. All classified information is done through executive order. It's done through the president of the United States. So it's the president who runs all the secrets. So they say, even though he is able to make all the secrets, the question is he able to declassify information at any time? And the question is still to them up in the air. But at the end, it says this very important line, but many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about something, the information is effectively declassified. And that's extremely important. I'll bring it up numerous times in this lecture. When the president talks about something, most experts agree that that subject is suddenly declassified. The prime example that's always used is Jimmy Carter, when he was running for re-election, talked about the stealth fighter. And at that moment, the stealth fighter was declassified, and it was a mistake, and people were very upset that he had mentioned the stealth fighter, but it immediately declassified the stealth fighter. So the basic story of Obama getting this thing going starts in 2012. It starts in February of 2012. Barack Obama goes to Roswell, New Mexico. And the important thing about this statement that he makes is Barack Obama does not have to bring this statement up. If it's the most highly classified subject in the United States, it would be smart for the president to realize that the minute you bring up a subject, people can start asking you, well, is this for real? Like, why did you bring up this subject? Why is it in your speech? All presidential speeches are very carefully written. They go through 25 agencies. Some of them, like the State of the Union address, is written 30 times. There's all sorts of drafts that are done. Everything that the president says is very carefully measured. So when the president stands up and talks about something, he intends it to be in the speech. There's a reason it's in the speech. So Barack Obama starts talking about aliens at Roswell. And here's what he says. We landed here in Roswell. I announced to the people when I landed that I had come in peace. Now this references a 1950 alien invasion movie, and people all laugh. And then Barack says, let me tell you, there are more 9 and 10-year-old boys around the country. When I meet them, they ask me, have you been to Roswell? And is it true what they say? And I tell them, if I told you, I would have to kill you. And so their eyes get real big and people are laughing. So he says, he stops, and then there's a hesitation, and then you can tell this is no longer in the speech. He says, we're going to keep our secrets here. So he basically confirms there is a secret, and we're going to keep our secrets about Roswell. So this starts in February of 2012. And again, many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about the information, it is effectively declassified. So this may mean that he's basically opening up the Roswell subject for people to talk about. The next event happens in May of 2012. Jaden Smith, whose father was in a lot of famous movies, including The Men in Black, gets an invitation to visit the White House. And so he's going to take Jaden. Jaden is very much into all sorts of conspiracy stuff. He's into UFOs. And Jaden says to Will Smith, he said, I want to ask Barack about the aliens. And Will Smith says, no, do not embarrass me. Do not bring up the subject in front of the president. And he said, no, Dad, I want to ask. And he said, no, do not bring up the subject. So they go to the White House, and they are in the Situation Room. Barack is giving the tour to the family. They're in the Situation Room, and this is where all the sort of the center of power at the White House. And at that moment, Jaden decides he's going to ask the president about UFOs, and he looks up at his father. And this is the way that Will Smith described it on BBC. And Barack is starting to talk about the Situation Room, and Jaden says, excuse me, Mr. President. And I'm like, hey, Barack, man, listen. And Barack says, don't tell me. And in perfect form, and this is why he is the president. This is what Will Smith says. He stops and looks at Jaden and said, the aliens, right? Okay, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of extraterrestrials, but I can tell you, if there had been a top secret meeting, and if it would have been a discussion about it, it would have taken place in this room. Again, he did not have to bring this up. He knew that Jaden was going to leak this. They knew this story was going to get out, that he was talking about having a meeting in the Situation Room about UFOs, extraterrestrials. And so again, many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about something, the information is effectively declassified. So again, Barack is opening this thing up. He's openly talking about UFOs. And you got to remember that this is not common. Most people think, well, every president did it. Absolutely not. If you go back to the Ford administration, Gerald Ford, before he became president, said, we should open the subject up. We should not only open it up, we should get the people who have been involved. We should put them under oath and force them to tell us what's going on. The minute he became president, in his White House, Gerald Ford never, ever uses the word UFO. Well, he's president. He does after president, before president, but when he's president, he never uses the word UFO. The same happened with Jimmy Carter. He had a UFO sighting. He said, I will release all the files to the people except for the stuff that has to do with military and technology. When he gets to the White House, he never uses the word UFO. So the idea that the president talks about UFOs is not common. It's very uncommon, and Barack starts to do it all the time. This happens a couple of months after the Jaden thing. This is Chase Brandon, who for 10 years was the top official at the CIA to speak publicly on behalf of the CIA. He did not have to get authorization for things that he said. He was the liaison to Hollywood for the CIA. He's writing a book called the Christos Conundrum, and he says, this is important, he said it was reviewed a number of times by the CIA. The book tells the fictional account of how the CIA handled the Roswell crash. So just after Brock comes out and talks about Roswell, and this is on the 65th anniversary of Roswell, suddenly Chase Brandon goes on Coast to Coast. And you got to remember, this is all his books reviewed by the CIA. He appears in front of a couple million people, and this is what he says. Absolutely. No, I know as I sit here talking to you that there was a craft from beyond this world that crashed at Roswell, and that the military picked it up, remains not just of wreckage, but of cadavers. So he basically says Roswell was real, it was extraterrestrial, and there were bodies. And he basically walks back into the shadows. 2013. In August of 2013, the story, Brock starts to leak the story of Area 51. There's a map that's released in August of 2013 in which Area 51 appears on that map. In November of 2013, a bunch of documents are declassified from the CIA, and those documents talk about Roswell. And this is another important thing, especially with Chase Brandon, that when somebody from the CIA comes out and says something, or when they declassify stuff, I say it has to be green lighted by the White House. The CIA is not a rogue agency. It does not just go and do what it wants to do. It has only one job, according to Chase Brandon, and that is to work for the people at 60,000 feet. That's the executive branch, the president, and the head of intelligence for the House and Senate. That's their only job. That's what they do. So when the CIA comes out and makes an announcement, you have to be very clear that this has to have been green-lighted by the White House. Otherwise, if it goes south, if something goes wrong, the president is going to get the blame for it. So the president is responsible. The only thing that the CIA does is work for the president. Therefore, when the CIA does something, you can bet that the president knows it's happening and has allowed it to happen. So in November 2013, a bunch of Area 51 documents are released, and everything starts to be talked about. Area 51 is in the news. And then in the very next month, December 2013, and this is the day after John Podesta, who's very much into X-Files and UFOs, joins the White House. The very next day after John Podesta enters the White House, Brock is giving a bunch of awards at the Kennedy Center, and one of the people there is Shirley MacLaine. And this is when Brock talks about Area 51. This is what he says. If I can get the screen to go. Now, when you first become president, one of the questions that people ask you is, what's really going on in Area 51? Well, I wanted to know, so I'd call Shirley MacLaine. And then everybody laughs, and then Brock says, I think I just became the first president ever to publicly mention Area 51. How's that, Shirley? So basically he's saying he knows the idea that when you talk about it, it's declassified, and that it goes on the record and said, I'm the first president to ever talk about Area 51 in public. And again, many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about something, that information is effectively declassified. And Area 51 is now a common subject. The government doesn't deny it. They don't play games. Area 51's for real. 2015, and this is when I believe it really starts. This is when this president initiative, I believe, actually goes into effect. This is when it starts. And it starts in February of 2015, and it starts with a tweet. It starts with a tweet by John Podesta. And the important thing about this date is this is the day that John Podesta leaves the White House. He leaves the White House to run the campaign for Hillary Clinton for president. And it's critically important that he writes that you realize that he wrote this tweet on the day he was leaving the White House, because it looks like a very great embarrassment to President Obama. He said, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again, not securing the disclosure of the UFO files, which indicates that he talked to Barack about it. And for whatever reason, Barack said, we can't go at this time. and probably said to John, we'll do the gradual disclosure, we'll pick it up. John is putting pressure on Barack Obama to do something. Let's do something, let's open this thing up. And Barack says, my hands are tied for, we can't do full disclosure. And this is when I believe this real gradual disclosure starts to move. March, the very next month, Barack appears on the Kimmel Show. And the whole idea is that the president appears and he knows what the questions that are coming. And he knew the UFO question was coming because Bill Clinton had been on there just before. And Kimmel is very interested. Every president that comes on there, he always asks them, when you got to the White House, did you look for the UFO files? So Barack goes on there knowing that he's going to get the UFO question. And when he actually gets the question, there was a review done by Ben Hansen, who was trained by the FBI on body language. When he does the review, he points out the fact that Barack is breathing. They're watching his lapel pin move up and down, that Barack is actually breathing at 42 breaths a minute. He's basically hyperventilating when the UFO question comes. And he's asked, what did you do when you got to the White House? Did you look for the files? And Barack says, I can't reveal anything. So he had the chance to say, no, there was nothing there. There are no UFOs. And he doesn't lie. But he basically says, I can't reveal anything. And the game is on. Everybody knows that Barack's talked about UFOs, and everybody starts to wonder what's going on. September 2015, it heats up even more. John Podesta, again, is the guy that initiates it. There's an interview that's done of Hillary Clinton by Lena Dunham. And after that interview, John Podesta actually puts out this tweet. And he says to Lena Dunham, he says, great interview, Lena Dunham. But Lena, ask her about the aliens next time. The important part of this is John is now the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. The campaign will cost $1 billion. And if this thing were to go south, if this thing were to suddenly spiral out of control, John Podesta would go down in history as the stupidest man that ever lived, that he brought up the alien subject and destroyed Hillary Clinton's campaign for president. So John had to uphold this thing. He had to have known this thing was not going to go south, and he puts on the pressure. So he's basically saying, ask her about the aliens. And the whole point is that he and Hillary have agreed that they are going to push the disclosure. They are going to do a disclosure when she becomes president. They're going to move this subject into the open. And so he wants a discussion in the presidential campaign about aliens and about disclosure. November of 2015, Hillary appears. So Hillary is now waiting for a question because John has said to the reporters, ask Hillary about the aliens. So Hillary is now waiting for a UFO question from somebody so she can start the story about she's going to disclose. She goes on the Kimmel Show in early November 2015. She's waiting for the question and she doesn't get it. And when John Podesta's emails were leaked, there was a memo that showed clearly that Hillary was very upset that she didn't get the UFO question, that she had practiced the answer for 5 minutes and she didn't get the UFO question. So they're waiting for this. And this is the most important element that happens. At the same time, Barack Obama appears. He does an interview for GQ magazine. And I believe this is the thing that really set this thing off. Barack is asked a question about secrecy. This is what he's asked. Have you ever said, give me the JFK assassination files. I want to read them. Give me all the secret stuff. Now, he's asked a question about JFK, and he starts talking about UFOs. He says this is very important. I got to tell you, it's a little disappointing. People always ask me about Roswell and aliens and UFOs, and it turns out that the stuff that goes on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you'd expect. In this day and age, it's not as top secret as you'd think. So Barack basically says, yes, there are UFO files, Roswell UFO files, they're top secret, but they're not as exciting as you think. Now, he basically just handed the whole story to this reporter, and as I always say, the guy either had a stroke or fell asleep, because his next question was to say, would you ever want to become a Supreme Court justice? He doesn't follow up on the question, and this thing floats into the public. And once again, you have this situation. Barack has talked about UFOs, Roswell being top secret and not as exciting as you think. Many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about something, the information is effectively classified. So he's moving this subject out so people can talk about it, so that this thing is opened up. And what happens next in December of 2015 is Hillary gets her first question from Damon Steer in New Hampshire. And Damon Steer has just contacted me in the last couple of days, and he's ready to go. He's got some other people he wants to talk to, and he's asked for help. He's very interested in getting politicians to answer to this whole thing. Damon Steer asks her, what about UFOs? Are you going to do something? And she basically says, yes, if I become president, I'm going to get to the bottom of this thing. I'm going to look at the subject. So she basically says, I'm going to do the disclosure thing. And that's when it starts. And the important thing about Hillary to realize is that Hillary never, ever brings up the subject. No matter what anybody tells you, she never brought up the subject. She only answered questions from other people. So she was asked 3 questions. She waited for the question. When she got it, she answered openly. She never walked around anything. Even when she's asked by Charlemagne in a New York interview for the Breakfast Club, Charlemagne says, I think I was abducted twice. She said, oh, yeah, okay. And she basically agrees with him. Yeah, I believe you. And says, I believe people are telling the truth. And basically is very open in her answers to the UFO subject. But the important thing to remember is she's waiting for these questions. And this is a setup. They're using these questions to set up this disclosure initiative that Hillary will do when she becomes president. So that's December. That's the very end of December. And then within a couple of weeks, the big meeting takes place. And this is January 2016. The meeting takes place on January the 25th. This is a memo out of John Podesta's email files that talks about the day before. This is a secretary to John Podesta writing him an email. And in that one, she says, Tom, who's Tom DeLong, would like to do the meeting remotely via video conference. I'll set it up via Google Hangouts, what we use for all staff meetings at headquarters. I'll show you how to get on Google Hangout from your iPad this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So basically, they set up this meeting, and the meeting is on UFO disclosure. There's absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts. So Barack has got this thing rolling, and John now is going to have a meeting. He was contacted by Tom DeLong, and he said, I'm very busy. Let me get back to you on this UFO disclosure thing. John doesn't phone him back for 2 months. The reason I say he didn't phone him back for 2 months is he has to know what's the protocol, who's talking to Tom DeLong, what's going on, and he gets all the what's my role in this whole thing. Then he contacts Tom back and he said, okay, I'm ready to play the game. I'm ready to get in. And he starts to work with Tom DeLong. And Tom DeLong has this very key meeting that takes place in January of 2016. You have John Podesta's at the meeting. Tom DeLong is in this Google Hangout meeting. You have McCaslin on the bottom left, who is a general, U.S. Air Force general, who ran the lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where it was rumored that the bodies and the crafts were taken. In the middle, you have a very important guy, Robert Weiss, who ran Lockheed Skunk Works. And Lockheed Skunk Works is the agency that's always been rumored to be the one that does the back engineering on UFOs. The bottom right-hand corner, you have Michael Carey, who was assistant at U.S. Air Force Space Command, and he's also a general. So you have 2 generals. You had the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, John Podesta, and Tom DeLong in a Google Hangout meeting on January the 25th, talking about UFO disclosure and where it's going to go. And later on, there's actually an interesting thing where Weiss actually contacts Tom DeLong and says, contact John, is there any follow-up? So John had offered to do something. John had said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, whatever. And Weiss is actually contacting back the head of Lockheed Skunk Works to say, you know, what's going on? What are we doing? Has John got any further information? February 2016, Barack goes on to the Ellen Show. And again, this it was Ben Hansen that pointed this out, how staged this whole thing was. This is a shot where you can see little girl by the name of Macy, who's a presidential expert. She's only 6 years old. She knows everything about presidents. She gets to meet Barack, and they have cue cards. And you can see she's actually not looking at Barack when she asks the question. She's reading off a cue card that has the question for her. So this whole thing is basically staged. And what she basically asks Barack is, are aliens real? And so Barack answers this, and you can, when he answers, he's reading off a cue card as well. He's not really looking at her, he's reading off a cue card. And he said, the truth is Macy, we, and he sort of stumbles, we, and he sort of stumbles again, haven't really made direct contact with the aliens yet, but when we do, I will let you know. And you got to remember, this was all staged beforehand. I contacted Macy's parents on the Facebook, and they did not reply. But when you see Ben Hanson's review, it's pretty evident that this whole thing was a setup where Brock wanted to do this alien thing all over again because Macy's interested. And again, many legal experts agree that once the president speaks publicly about something, the information is effectively declassified. February 2016, we have the CIA, and again, you got to realize the CIA has only one job, and that's to work for the president and the Senate and House intelligence and the executive branch. And so when the CIA suddenly puts an article, a straight up article piece on their Twitter feed, on the front of their Twitter feed about how to investigate a UFO sighting, instead of saying we're not involved in UFOs, there are no UFOs, there's no extraterrestrials, no threat to national security, when the CIA puts this on their website, you got to think that this is planned and the president knows it's going to be on the front page of the CIA. And in 2017, as Barack is leaving the White House, 2 days before, he suddenly drops these 12 million pages of material onto the internet from the CIA. And a lot of these documents deal with UFOs and with remote viewing. So just as he leaves the door, he does it again. He drops this these documents into the public, this acclimatization, this gradual disclosure thing. He can't fully disclose, but he's doing all this stuff in the background. This is the final one. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. Again, it's on the Kimmel show. Barack Obama appears, and he's doing sort of a little ad for funding for AIDS research. And it's on that video, which is on the internet. You can look at this video where he says the following thing. He's talking about, if you help me with the AIDS campaign, he said, this is what I'll do. He said, I'll share my files on the aliens. You know how badly he, who's referring to Jimmy Kimmel, wants to see them. I'll share my files on the aliens. And then the guy offset yells at him and says, you can't do that. And then Brock says, what, we can't do that anymore? No, you can't do that. You can't do that. And then he said, but they're right here. They're right in my desk. And the guy off screen yells, no, it's classified. You can't talk about it. Oh, okay. And so this is how they do it. This is how gradual acclimatization, this is how they move the ball down the field. And that's how on Saturday, they suddenly have a guy come forward with a bunch of film. And the question is, how does he get the film? Maybe he quit. Maybe he quit in disgust that he was working on a UFO program and he decided he was going to leave. The thing was, how do you actually get this guy to walk out with a film? The fact that they released the film indicates this is acclimatization. This is the government. This is not Tom DeLonge. This is the government. This is maybe Barack Obama starting this, and other presidents starting this, where this gradual acclimatization is in the program, and they've just speeded it up. And from what I'm told, you haven't seen anything yet. What happened on Saturday is just the beginning. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to do an update on the Tom DeLonge thing. I'm going to do the whole involvement of Bigelow in this operation, and it'll probably come out tomorrow. So thanks.